Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. And I am so excited to be joined today by a person whose videos I've been enjoying a lot recently. We cover a lot of similar material, and I think it's going to be a fantastic conversation. Macabre storytelling. That's how you pronounce the word macabre, right? Because sometimes I pronounce it wrong.
It's kind of like up for debate, basically. When I first started the channel, I pronounced it macabre because that's how I thought you pronounced it. Turns out the R and E are kind of silent, so it's macabre. So we just kind of go with both, really.
Gotcha. But you go by Mac too, right?
Yeah, Mac is kind of like my personal. Yeah,
Okay, I'll use that so we don't sound stupid during this podcast. Yeah,
I've even like considered changing the channel to just Mac just to like break the confusion. But
I got you. Um, yeah, but well, thank you so much for hopping on this podcast. I love to always start out these conversations with just like a little bit of an introduction for someone of my viewers who might not know you. Can you tell me a little bit about maybe what you do on your channel and how you got started with YouTube?
yeah, really, I mean, I wasn't even really big of a. I watched YouTube videos here and there, but for the most part, I wasn't like really big. I didn't really comment or even really watch that much YouTube. I remember it was like maybe what was it 2018, 2019 when I first started, like 3 years ago. I think I was just like cooped up in my house for it was like during the winter or something, and I needed to kind of have some creative outlet. So I made a video on Game of Thrones, um, the character Tyrion, which is like my first video. And I made it, and it didn't really go anywhere. Of course, it was just my first video ever. Made a couple other videos that kind of got a few views and like whatever. And I kind of kept up with it, but not really. It was just mostly something to kind of have just to keep myself busy. And then like a year later, the Tyrion video blew up, and then all of a sudden I was like, holy shit. And that kind of kept me to keep going. We started the Game of Thrones rewrite series, where we kind of break down each character's arc in the show, try to fix it, or at least make it better from how it ended in the show, which isn't exactly the highest bar. But and yeah, it's kind of went from there. Just sort of and as you mentioned before we started, the channel kind of drifted away from Game of Thrones specifically and just sort of into general media discussion, and then it kind of expanded into sort of like social issues that kind of relate to media discussion. So yeah, the channel is kind of just a hodgepodge of all sorts of stuff, but mostly focused around storytelling.
Yeah, no, we were talking a little bit before we got the podcast started about channels having going through something of an identity crisis, and I think I'm kind of going through something similar, which is just like you. I kind of got big off of The Sopranos, which wasn't the only thing I was ever doing. I was doing like classic films and stuff like that too. But you build up an audience around a certain video that gets really big, and then you start doing other stuff, and people are like, oh well, what is this now? But I think as we were talking about before, it really comes down to just making a type of content that you want to make, what interests you, because I think ultimately that's what this is all about, is just like you said, a creative outlet for the different things that you're interested in, whether it's Game of Thrones, whether it's Sopranos, whether it's social issues, whatever. I think that's the key to enjoying this process, because it can be a very difficult process at times to be a content creator and dealing with like fans and commenters and detractors and all that stuff. And it can definitely drive you crazy. I know it's driven me crazy at times.
Oh, absolutely. Like you mentioned, like you kind of fell into your sort of like your niche with The Sopranos. Mine was Game of Thrones, and I think we can both agree like we didn't want to both be in a position where because even today I still get um, comments on. I still have to do the Game of Thrones rewrite finale. I've been like putting that off for a long time, and I'll get to it. But just like in general, people are like, "Hey, you're gonna make more Game of Thrones videos," and kind of feel the same way that you do about your Sopranos videos because, like we mentioned before, like you've made a breakdown of every single episode, and so at some point, it's just like, what else do you really want me to say? At some point, it's gonna get to the point where I'm just kind of like making crap up or just kind of pulling it out of my hat. And I'm not really going to be passionate about it. I'm just going to be sort of just talking, and it's just going to kind of lose the passion isn't going to be there because you're just doing it as like a job at that point.
Yeah. I think if you give yourself a break for a while, there might be some new angle you haven't explored before where it's like, oh wait, this does interest me again. But definitely if you try to force it, it's gonna come out, it's not gonna be enjoyable for the viewer, it's not gonna be enjoyable for you. Um you are in an interesting place though that there is a new Game of Thrones show coming out, House of the Dragon, which I am tentatively hopeful about. The season, not just season 8, but like kind of everything from season 4 onward kind of disappointed me. And so I don't want to get my hopes up for, a fantastic series, but that will be interesting to check out. Do you have plans to do anything about House of the Dragon?
Originally, no. Like right after the Game of Thrones finale, I remember that night. It kind of went downhill because the last like 3 episodes of the series are just it kind of is like like you said, like ever since season 4 it kind of went downhill, but it was always sort of like struggling, kind of trying to keep it up, and then the last 3 episodes it was like a nosedive. Um, and so by that point, by the finale, I think that was actually something that I've mentioned where with The Sopranos, the finale caused a lot of discourse. Even people who hated it still like it, still caused a lot of buzz, still caused a lot of people, like interpretations. The Game of Thrones finale, I don't think I've ever seen this where something was so popular, so talked about for like it defined like almost a decade to some extent in terms of television, and then overnight it's gone. And it's almost as if people just, and I hate to use this word, you know, inappropriately, but it almost was like a semi-traumatic thing where we just kind of wanted to like we all put our hearts into this, we all loved it so much, and then overnight it was just we don't even want to discuss it. Um, but after I've given it some time, gotten through the rewrite series, I'm looking back on this the new show coming out, and again, I wasn't gonna touch it, but I might. I might do like an episode by episode breakdown. Although I don't really, it's just my. I think that initial spark of passion that kind of led me to make the original rewrite series is just sort of gone at this point. So
Yeah, it's a really interesting like social phenomenon. Like you said, it's very rare that a show hits an accord with so many people and then just disappeared. I think the only kind of comparable example I could think of is maybe like Lost, which was also a big phenomenon, but also people were very disappointed in it. I haven't actually seen Lost, but just being around those conversations with people, being interested in a show like that. Now you're I take from the rewrites I've seen that you're a book reader, correct?
the books, yes, I have.
Gotcha. I am a book reader myself. I was deep into the fandom when the show was going on. Although I will say I got into the books because I just couldn't stand to wait for the show. I think I started um, reading around maybe season 2 when season 2 was done, and I just needed to know what happened and I couldn't wait. And it's a very difficult thing because the books are, at least in my opinion, really good. They're fantastic. They have so much depth of character, and I think like a adaptation was kind of doomed to fail from the beginning just because there's so many like ephemeral themes and like characterization that I don't know how you would fit all of that into a series. Even if you had more seasons, there's just some level of the language that George uses that I don't think could really come across in an adaptation well. It could definitely be done better than what we got, but yeah, the books are just to me on another level than the show.
Absolutely. Another big thing is the fact that in the books, the sort of, well, there's two things. One is the history, the fact that like the actual lore of the series that goes back in some cases hundreds of years is actually very important to the events that's happening in the show. And trying to and a lot of that is just sort of communicated through just general prose, like in the middle of a chapter, which can be wordy at times. It kind of is hard, especially like when you're getting to like the climax of, like say Storm of Swords or something. You kind of just want to like get to the next, plot development. But the history is very important to the character motivations, the context, and trying to communicate that in the show without it coming off as just like tons and tons and tons of expository monologues, which there are plenty of, but at least it's like interesting. But eventually, but you can't like do it to such an extent as you do in the books. Um, as well as, and then the second thing is some of the character shifts are very internal that you really so one example is we talked about Sansa Stark, who throughout the series she is primarily in a position where she really can't speak her mind. She's either at King's Landing under the watchful eye of the Lannisters, or she's with Littlefinger. And so like she can't really express what she's actually thinking at any given time. So in the book, a lot of her character development or characterization is expressed through her inner monologue. The issue is that in the television show, you really can't. You can do that a little bit through some scenes, but for the most part, that's kind of why it seems like Sansa just sort of like. Whereas in the book, she's kind of like slowly learning how to manipulate others, sort of be observant of others. In the show, it just seems like she's just sitting around for like two whole seasons, which, and kind of like you said, to some extent, I don't really know how they would have done it any differently.
Yeah, it's interesting too because you know, people not 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 everyone, but there's been a lot of people who have kind of criticized or not enjoyed the later books, or at least particularly Feast for Crows, because it's a story that is very much limited in scope. Coming off of Storm of Swords, which is just this action-packed novel where each chapter there's major development and major stuff happening. It's very exciting to read. To go to something like A Feast for Crows, which is much more slow, I think that's when a lot of fans were like, this is not nearly as engaging as the previous stuff was. But for me, upon multiple rereadings, definitely like at first I was kind of unimpressed too, just like most people. But the limited nature of the storytelling made for some really fantastic emotional moments, particularly like Brienne's storyline just wandering the Riverlands. We have some great theme and character and tragedy there, but it's something that, like you said with Sansa, doesn't really come off well on like a TV show or movie, because it's just a character wandering around having thoughts. There's no exciting moment that you need to keep people engaged, which I don't think. I mean, there's plenty of shows, right, that we both have taken a look at, like The Sopranos and The Wire, which don't rely on big set piece moments. But it's also, those shows are not being based off of a written book that is trying to bring in a lot of these prose elements into the show. So definitely a difficult task, but I definitely think they could have done it better than what we got.
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of veered off into one thing you mentioned about the books is that the books are really, and I hate I don't want to like reveal my ignorance of other literature, but the books really are something, at least for me, the first series that I read where I really could at some point I really couldn't tell who the good guys and bad guys were. And I know that sounds very cliche. However, like I really mean it in terms of this series, where at some point, like characters like Arya, John, Tyrion, especially even Danny, at some point you kind of start to lose your grasp on like, wait, which character is like the quote unquote good guy. And I really admire Martin for not really um, feeling feeling as if he's constrained by that. He can kind of make these characters go in directions that he thinks is natural, whether or not that keeps them quote unquote, morally pure or whatever. The issue is that in the television series, especially after season 4, it kind of veered off into this Hollywood esque tone where even though generally the characters were kept intact in terms of their general arcs, well, in some cases, in other cases, no. But it kind of veered off into this, even by like the end of the series, there were still sort of good guys and bad guys, and I get it. It's a television show. You always have to have sort of that Hollywood esque vibe to it. But it just kind of, it's like you're trying to do two completely different things simultaneously, and that's why at the end, especially with spoiler alert, I mean, if it's been a while, but with Danny's ending especially, that's why it just came off as so wrong, because it's like this isn't who she is. You didn't build this up. You championed her as like this big savior for so long, and then you're just toss it in the garbage.
Well, I think one of the things that Martin does so well is that he doesn't, we talk a lot about like gray characters versus black and white characters, but he doesn't do great characters necessarily in the sense of like the Hollywood moment of like, Danny's bad because she's killing people. That's a very like external, exciting way to make your character complex, which I think the show was trying to do with that ending with Danny. Is like, she's gotten so focused on her mission and revenge or whatever that she's willing to sacrifice all these people, and in their minds that's a really complex character. But what I think Martin does so well is he makes the complexity very subtle to the point where, like you said, you don't notice it at first. One example I always like to say is like Rob Stark. When we're watching Rob or reading Rob Stark in the book, we're cheering him on because it's like, yes, this you're gonna go avenge Ned, you're gonna go get justice, you're the young wolf. This is fantastic. I'm so into you. But when you look back on like Brienne chapters and stuff, and you see the devastation that the War of the Five Kings caused all these people, you at least I did. I came to kind of dislike Rob a lot for his naivete and his inability to kind of control the war and bring it to a decisive end. He really feels to me now like a kid playing a man's game. Not to use like cliche terms like that, but and you come to like almost appreciate characters like Tywin, who, while brutal, their brutality kind of served a purpose and it brought like a decisive end to the conflict. And I think the same thing with like Danny. A lot of her complexity was being a character with good intentions, but is caught up in her own biases. I think a lot of the Marine stuff really comes down to bias. I think Danny, a lot of her problems is she fundamentally just doesn't understand the Miranese culture that she's trying to control. There's a lot of themes of like you know she's trying to kind of like impose like a Westerosi standard to these people who are not that, they don't have that. There's this whole thing of like, she's searching for the Harpy, the leader of the Sons of the Harpy, which she thinks is like a man. But to me, I always, and this is spoiler alert, but only really book nerds would care about this. I think the leader of the Harpy is the Green Grace, who is a woman, and that's just Danny's kind of bias that she can't, like, she's from like this culture where it's like the men are the leaders, and she just can't like put this together. And so I think, like I said, the whole point of this rambling nonsense is that a lot of the complexity is subtle in the books, whereas in the show they tried to make it explosive and like dramatic.
Exactly. The in the books, and I'm glad you brought it because that's because the Marine plot line has always been the biggest, controversial sort of thing in the series, the book series. Because everyone's just like, what the hell is she doing? Where is she going with this? And from a plot perspective, I agree. It kind of is pretty slow. It isn't really related to the main plot. At least, I mean, like it might factor in, but probably not. But from a character standpoint, it is incredibly important because up until that point, she was able to sort of like, she was able to, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, she was able to kind of like conquer or like sort of like win, come out on top through. And it's funny because you don't really realize it until you look back. For the most part, she did so by force. She did so by kind of like, with the iron fist. And sometimes that is necessary in this world as we see. However, she gets the Marine and then she starts to realize that she is completely incompetent. And it's interesting because at the beginning she tries to start out as if oh, I'm going to do, she even has like that self-awareness. I have to find out how to rule before I go to Westeros. And then as she tries, you think, oh, this is her, she's going to grow as a character. And then by the end she's just basically given up. She's like, she realizes how incompetent she is at understanding these people, which makes a lot of sense considering her arc or how it turns out in the show about when she goes to Westeros. She's a lot more, she doesn't really know how to handle it. She's either going to be incompetent or most likely, as evident in the show, she's just kind of going to be like, you know what, that's diplomacy bullshit. Or sorry if I can't swear. Okay. Like, yeah, like, that diplomacy bullshit didn't work out for me. I'm just gonna kinda come in and kind of, impose my will, and if they don't like it, they can get used to it. But because yeah, in the show, it was like it didn't really feel like she was struggling with trying to find that balance. In the show, it just felt like she was just kind of making really weird choices all over the place, and nothing really made sense. And some people have defended it. Well, that's kind of the point, but I'm like, I don't really. It's not very coherent as a character change.
No, I hate that argument that people have where it's like, if something doesn't make sense, like people sometimes will say like, oh, but that's real life. Like things don't make sense in real life, or some kind of variation of that argument. But that's stupid to be like, this is not real life. This is a show that we're setting up. We're foreshadowing. We're building character. And there'll always be debate among like an art, right? There's different ways to interpret it, but yeah, that argument to me has always been incredibly annoying to listen to. So hopefully they don't go down that route with the new show. I think hopefully they'll learn the lesson, but time has taught me to be cautious with any kind of expectation we have.
Hopefully, and then there's always the fear that like, will they sort of play it safe with the series? And I am kind of optimistic just because they do have a lot of lore to go off of with Martin. They're not just flying blind like the D&D where. Um, just to circle back, funny enough, I love that you mentioned the Rob Stark character because I was thinking more like John with his dealing with the wildlings, Tyrion's arc, obviously Arya's arc. When it comes to Rob, you're so on point because there's one scene that me and like my viewers we've talked about, and we even discussed it in his the Blackfish's video because we discussed Edmure. Is the scene where Rob chews out Edmure about his actions dealing with the mountain and the mill. Now in the show, the scene is like, Edmure, you idiot! Like you should have listened to me and yada yada. And so it's just kind of like trying to pwn Edmure. Whereas in the book, and a lot of people kind of feel this way now, looking back, that was kind of Rob's bad. Like, should Edmure have done it? Maybe not. He should have stayed put. But the fact that like Edmure and the Blackfish had like this like ulterior plan to draw the mountain into the west, and he didn't inform his top men of said plan, it's like you're like again, I agree that like Edmure shouldn't have done that, but at the same time, it's like why, if this was your whole plan, why didn't you communicate this? And I think like in your like as you mentioned, whereas in the show it's not really touched upon, I think in the book that's definitely a sign that he's a bit he's kind of petulant. He doesn't really know what exactly he's doing. He's good in some ways, but in others he just kind of is flying blind in a sense.
Well, I think a lot of what the show's problems were also stem from the fact that um, in terms of like today's media, we have like a very different. I don't know what the correct word is. It's not really zeitgeist, but like a lot of media today, because of maybe the demographic that watches it and the demographic that write it, they really want to portray young people as like we are always right. It's the old people who are, not correct, and they're all the problems of the world. And if we young people just got a chance, we would solve everything. And a lot of people feel that way in real life when you look at history or whatever. But I think one of the problems the show had was it didn't want to show these kind of young, sexy heroes as not even like being wrong, but like just being incorrect. Like you brought up before, Danny is like incompetent in many ways, which is not like a critique of her character because that's totally normal that a 13-year-old girl who has no experience doing this is now thrust into a position because of her birth would struggle with this stuff, and that doesn't make her a worse character, it makes her a better character. But a lot I think the show wanted to show that like characters like Arya, John, Sansa were always right. They might have done bad stuff sometimes, but they were not incorrect. And I think George, because of his seniority and his experiences, is willing to show characters in this negative, in this like unsexy light. Like Danny was evil at moments, but she was evil in like a sexy, powerful kind of way. which I think is the kind of storytelling that the writers' room of Game of Thrones wanted to do, or at least maybe David and Dan wanted to do. Whereas I think if you really want to write real complex characters, you'll show them not only as like good or evil or whatever, but like failing and like not accomplishing their goals in a satisfying way. I think The Sopranos did that. I think The Wire does that. I think if you're going to tell a mature story, you have to be willing to show your characters as not heroes.
Absolutely. And it almost makes the audience feel, especially for like younger kids, it almost makes them feel you think it makes them feel empowered because like, oh, look at these young kids doing it. Actually, I think in many ways makes younger kids, especially when I was younger, watching sort of shows that had that vibe, kind of made me feel inadequate in many ways. In the sense that like, how come this person at like 18 has it all together and is so mature and knows all about the world and has all their shit together, and here I am at 18 and I'm like a hot mess. Um, and compare that with like other shows like I grew up watching like Boy Meets World. That's a perfect show where the characters were very young and stupid because uh, kids are in many ways young and stupid. They are very you kind of touched upon it, the difference between like the older generation and the new. The older generation has the wisdom. They know facts about the world that these younger kids won't know for years or decades. However, their issue is trying to adjust to the new world coming. And the younger kids, like the younger generations, they have a grasp on the new world, but they don't have a grasp of those sort of like fundamental worldly truths, which is why, like, or even you could even argue Ned had that sort of issue where he didn't kind of, he had this like sense of honor and like code, which is admirable. But by the end of the first book, we're kind of like, come on, man, you gotta kind of adjust, man. This isn't like this like no one else around you is like is playing by these rules, and you need to sort of step up. That's sort of why with Tywin, as unforgivable as the Red Wedding was, and we can like, oh, that's so dishonorable, that's so horrible, you betrayed like all these customs. But at the same time, it's like, I mean, he got the job done, and in a way that sort of like reduced the overall amount of chaos and death. So there's sort of like a give and take there. You can't always be honorable and expect whereas in a lot of movies, kind of like you touched on, or a lot of media, it's always framed as long as you like stay true to your heart and are honest, everything will turn out in the end. And unfortunately, as in some cases that is true, but in some cases it's just not true, and that's just a fact of life that you have to accept.
It's interesting. I just thought of this like randomly off the top of my head. If you think of that last scene in Game of Thrones when King Bran has his council, who makes up the council? We've got Tyrion, we got Braun, we've got Brienne. Right? Is Brienne? I'm forgetting because I haven't watched it since I watched it the first time. But it's all young characters that I remember, or relatively young. I mean, Tyrion is older than Bran, of course, but he's still a young man meant to be in his kind of probably early 30s in the show. I mean, they've adjusted ages, but that's kind of a statement, I think, of the kind of political theory or understanding that the writers had, which is like, if we just got young people in power, everything will be solved. But in real life, you would want like a mixture of like, yeah, some younger people who again are more adaptable to change, but also you want those older people who have wisdom. It's also Samwell, who's the Grand Maester now.
Yeah, they have Sam, they have Edmure, they have, I'm looking at the picture because again, I'm with you, I totally forget. They have Street Robin, um, uh, a an ambassador from Dorne. There's a couple characters in there who are just random, like we've never seen before, and it was just like okay, and they don't do any talking either. So it's like Brienne's there, Davos is there.
Why
Um,
was he Davos? I guess is probably the oldest one at the
mhm.
end there. I guess he maybe represents that, but again, it's an interesting statement when you look at the mindset of the writers of, and I think it's how they differ from George here, and especially once they were, like you said, they were let loose with not having the material to just work off of. They had to kind of make their own story, which I guess you could lay the blame a little bit on George for not finishing his magnum opus after all this time. But
Well, it's hard looking back, and I don't mean to just say this as like to hate on D&D as much animosity as I have toward them in general. But the biggest thing, that was always kind of the excuse. However, looking back, and this didn't really hit me until I did my rewrite video on Dorn. Looking back, I actually think I don't know if that flies anymore because a good chunk of the Dorn plot was in the books throughout Feast of Crows and Dance of Dragons. And in the show, they flubbed it up so badly, but not even to the point where like, oh, it didn't turn out to be whatever. Yeah, it wasn't even that, but like just saying the characterization of Ilaria, um, her entire characterization was a 180 to the point where it was nonsensical. Like she's with Oberyn, and Oberyn was always, and darn, we don't hurt little girls. And then, of course, next season, it's like, I want to hurt a little girl. And it's just like that, like, that's something where, like, if they made certain changes to try and, like, make up, because the Dorn plot is very complicated, especially trying to mesh it with the rest of the show. I can understand if they made some decisions that kind of led them astray. But then there are others where I just think, like, books or no, I think you kind of let your own ego get the best of you, and you just kind of lost the plot at some point.
it was it was, I think, a combination of lazy writing where they just didn't put the time in, because there's so many like little mistakes that they make where it's like they refer to a character that's not correct, like a historical figure that's not correct, or they change it for no reason. I think that's just honestly just like laziness to not go back and just do a second draft. The D&D were really trying to, I think, wrap up the show quickly because they had another development deal and they were just tired of doing the show. They were going to do something about the Civil War, some kind of show about that. Um,
Oh yeah, that whole
it's
controversy.
Yeah, that whole thing. And speaking of controversy, I'm going to say something that's probably going to upset some people, which is it's also a little bit about like the culture we're in right now and how we want to portray women. Like Ilaria, they wanted to add another strong, female character, but their interpretation of what that means is she's got to kill people. She's got to, not care about what anyone thinks because that's what strong women do. They only listen to themselves. And I think it's just a horrible kind of simplification of what makes a strong female character. I think we'll both agree in the books, there are plenty of strong female characters. I think George considers himself to be a feminist, as much as, that means. Um, but again, part of portraying characters as real is to not have them be one-dimensional action movie heroes, but have them have depth and have them. They can be vulnerable in some moments. They can be, evil in other moments. They can be, all these different things. But I think for Dorn specifically, like Alaria and the Sand Snakes, they're like, nope, this is what a strong woman does. She kills her family members for no reason because she don't need no man kind of situation.
And it's funny because like it isn't even in the show, like not even the books, even in the show, you already had that sort of like diversity of portrayals. You had Brienne, who is a very sort of like noble, heroic, and yet like sort of like non-traditionally feminine character. You had Cersei, who was kind of like a smorgasbord of all over the place. She had very feminine characteristics. She was ruthless. She was cunning. She used force. And then you have Marjorie, who is able to sort of like, play the role or embrace traditional femininity, but to her own advantage. And a very sort of like, she's still just as power hungry and ruthless as the other characters, but she displays that in a different way. She doesn't just go around just like chopping off heads. And that was already in the show. We had that diversity, that sort of like that array of different female types. And then you get to by the second half of the series, all the characters just become one note. Like even Sansa, even though she was being built up into this like very cunning, manipulative, sort of very similar to Littlefinger. Littlefinger was never a character who took things by force. He always played the long game. He never felt the need to sort of like assert his dominance because he knew in the long run he would still come out on top, or it would make him a target in many ways. And yet by the end of the series, you had Arya, Sansa, Dany, Cersei. They all just became these like very I'm going to take what I want by force, or like I have to I have to demonstrate dominance outright. And the irony is that throughout the series, what we've seen is that regardless of male or female, uh, doing so, like sort of like trying to be that like big dog dominance, that makes you a target, and it actually makes you a lot more likely to get snuffed out very early. So it just didn't even make any sense.
No, it's yeah. I mean, I think that again, it's the kind of culture of the show when it was coming out. It was very reactionary, very trying to push. I don't mean push an agenda in a particularly negative way. I think again, I think they were trying to maybe correct some things and be like, well, we haven't seen, females do this before, so we'll do this storyline, which I don't think it's a horrible thing to want to, be able to write characters in a different way than we've seen before. But I just think they became straw men or straw women, maybe in this case. And I don't think it just applies to the female characters. I think there was a lot of simplification when it came to the male characters too. Characters like John, characters like Tyrion, who you've talked about this in a video, completely whitewashed his character and removed any kind of negativity when it came to him because he was a fan favorite.
What was he even like doing in the second half of the series? Like I didn't even know what his motivation were. I was like, what does he do? Does he want to kill Cersei? Like what's going I don't even think the writers knew. He was just kind of meandering around. It was so weird.
It's so interesting to see that scene where he is talking to the prostitute in the when he gets lost in maybe it was Pentos, maybe it was maybe it was another city, but in the books what he does legitimately is he rapes this woman. She's a sex slave who he pays for and has sex with and pukes all over and like it's sick. And again, it's showing how low he's fallen, which is very realistic considering everything he's been through. And in the show, they have this incredibly whitewashed version where he's like all shy and being like, "Oh, I'd really like to kiss you if I can," and she's like, "Oh, you've charmed me, and let's go have sex, and I won't even charge you because you're such a good person, you don't even have to pay for it." Um, Such a betrayal of his
And
character.
then she goes to lead him and he's like, I can't. And it
I
doesn't really
can't. I'm too
explain.
noble. I'm too in love with Shay, and I'm still traumatized with the memory, like a good man would be to sleep with you. And oh God, it's so bland and so horrible.
And it's so what's so insulting about it, and this kind of goes back to what the issue with the female characters is they don't allow the character to go in the direction they most likely would, even given the circumstances. So for example, with Arya, in the books, as we know, she's kind of losing it. She's like sort of nuts, and that makes perfect sense given the massive trauma she has undergone over the last God knows how many years of being so close to being reunited with her family and then getting ripped away over and over and over. With Tyrion, like actually put yourself in that headspace of throughout your entire life you're a complete outcast, you were completely just disregarded, mocked, insulted, and you've tried to mask it via this sort of like very stone cold sort of like detached attitude. You're thrust into a position where these same people who mocked you, you are the only one who can save them, and despite the fact that you probably should tell these people to go fuck themselves, you step up to the plate and you do it all. You don't receive any credit for it at all. Your entire role in this debacle is completely forgotten. And again, these are people who like you owe nothing and you still stepped up for them. Your contributions are completely disregarded. And then on top of that, you're made a scapegoat for Joffrey's death, and then people are just lambasting you, calling you a killer, a murderer, and then you're thrown under the bus by the one person who you really opened up to for the first time in your life since your traumatic incident with Taisha. And when he was like, I should have let Stannis kill you all. Like that makes sense going into in the books. Like, of course he's going to be this like incredibly bitter, like even borderline, like sort of like teetering with like just straight up evil and vindictive. Of course he is. That makes perfect sense given his circumstances. But the show, well, we can't have him do that. So despite that immense decades of trauma he underwent, he's fine. He's same old Tyrion. It's like bullshit. No. Oh, it's so frustrating.
It's so interesting too because we talked a little bit before about George's ability to have you think about a character one way when you first read it, and then upon rereading, have a different interpretation of it. Alt Shift X, who is a fantastic Game of Thrones creator, made this fantastic video about Tyrion, kind of pointing out that Tyrion has been kind of a shitty person since the first time we met him, and we see if we put ourselves out of his head because he's so sympathetic when we are in his thoughts, just like many of his characters are. When we look at a lot of his actions from like an external point of view, we see that like, oh, you're doing bad stuff here for kind of selfish reasons, like when he is in King's Landing as the hand of the king. He's taking all these actions, and we see his thoughts. And we're like, okay, good for you. You're doing this for a better reason. But when you look at it from an outsider's point of view, here's this little dwarf coming in here, bullying people, threatening to cut off people's cocks, acting like a jerk. And so we kind of understand, like, oh, I get why people kind of hate you because we're not hearing your thoughts, and they don't know your kind of background here of like that makes you sympathetic to us. And again, there's so much complexity in the books that some of it can't be across the show, but I think a lot more of it could than what we got if the writers had taken a little bit more time with it. And it's interesting to think about, what House of the Dragon might be like and to speculate on it because, like you said, unlike Game of Thrones, this is a complete story that we have. It's been told to us through, a couple of, historical novels that George has released. There's The World of Ice and Fire. We have all those background details, so they shouldn't flubber the plot as much as they did in the show. But it's a question of will they make the characters complex enough because the Dance of the Dragons is a very nuanced story with not real heroes. Like Rhaenyra is not Daenerys. She's not this, traditional feminine hero. She's kind of a mixture of like Cersei and Daenerys together, which could be really cool to see if they, actually bring that complexity to life. But will be horrible if they decide to just whitewash her and make her the good guy. Same thing with Aegon, and same thing with Daemon Targaryen. These are very complex characters that do not fit into like a traditional definition of good or bad. But yeah, we'll see what they manage to do.
Yeah, or even like even like with the character with Cersei, how in the books she is objectively a lot more borderline psychotic, cruel, vindictive, and yet I actually, and like some people don't agree, I actually think she's more empathetic in the books, in the sense, not in the sense of like I feel more sympathy for her. I think the show tried to lean too much on sympathy for Cersei, which it was kind of contrasted by the fact that like she ends up doing horrific things. So it's this very uneven balancing act. Whereas in the books, from the beginning, we really weren't supposed to sympathize with her. Maybe a little bit here and there, but for the most part, the book was just like, "Hey, she is a bad person, but I'm just simply asking you to understand why she is a bad person." And given her upbringing, given her surroundings, given the Maggie the Frog incident, the prophecy, yeah, I get it. I don't have to like her. I don't even have to sympathize with her at all. I hope she gets killed in a very brutal fashion because she deserves it. But she's fascinating because I get it. I understand her as a character, what makes her tick, what makes her do what she does. Whereas in the show, by the end, it just was. I didn't. That's another character in the final season. Like, what are you doing? Like, are you trying to fight back, or did you know it was doomed? Like, you're just staying there watching King's Landing. Are you like, just fuck? I thought I was actually going to win this. Like, really? Did you really? It's just, oh my god. Now I'm revisiting it. I'm like, damn.
I know. I'm the same way as I'm even just thinking. I've kind of tried to block out the final season, but God, there's so many things of like, the fact that they go north of the wall and then somehow are waiting there for Danny to come all the way from Dragonstone to save them. Just God, like you would think that you would, upon writing that script, be like, hey, this doesn't really make sense here. Maybe we should change some things. Maybe Danny comes with them north so that she's closer by to respond to this. And they're like, nah, whatever. We got a new show lined up. We're gonna go right for Disney or Marvel afterwards. Like, let's just end this as quick as we can. It's really, I can understand the contempt that people have for this, just because there's so many like things that could have been fixed easily with just a rewrite. There's something that couldn't have been fixed, right? Of like, you had to leave out characters. Okay, I accept that. You had to simplify some characters. I can accept that too. But just the basic level of mistakes and stuff that they had that, I feel like we've been harping on and on about this, but it's really insulting to the
Well,
viewer.
it's so funny that you bring that up about the white plot. Um, it's funny because a lot of people before I did the rewrite, we were thinking of, hey, are we going to rewrite this? How can we make it work? And we realized while we were going through it that the best way to make it work is to just completely remove it. Because what's ironic is that the entire point of going north to get the white and bring it to Cersei was to kind of convince her, like, hey, this is a real threat. But what they didn't realize is that Cersei was so nuts by that point that even though she now sees it's a real threat, she was going to backstab them no matter what. So if that was the case, if the entire time she was just bullshitting them, then the getting the white meant nothing. They could have just gone to drag. They should have just gone to King's Landing, and been like, "Hey, the whites are here," and Cersei, because she's planning on double crossing them, is like, "Yeah, sure, I'll send." It doesn't matter if she believes in it or not, because she was going to betray them anyway. So the entire white plot, which is the entire one of the biggest flubs I would say of the entire series, because it just makes no sense whatsoever, is completely pointless. However, they needed a way for the Night King to get a dragon, break the wall, and it's just like, really, all of that. Like, there are other ways we could have done it. Like I think, aren't there even ways that they were thinking of? I think even in the books there are theories that there are other ways that the walkers are going to get south of the wall without tearing it down, or like going around it. I think maybe.
So my big thing about the white plot that I hated so much, one, of course, they didn't explain anything. We don't know who the Night King is. We don't know what's. I mean, we kind of know. We had that scene of them making it. So the kind of implication is that the White Walkers are like a creation of the Children of the Forest to fight humanity that kind of went like crazy, like a Terminator type situation. But again, that's something that I had to basically headcanon for myself because they didn't explain it. I had to just make that explanation for them, which I hate when shows make me do that. Um, but beyond just that, I think, and of course, we don't know this because it's not in the books yet, but I really believe that we're not meant to, like, the White Walkers, the others as they're called in the books, which they don't ever say in the show, are not the bad guy as we understand them. They're not meant to be like this faceless evil army, because George has always said, it's not about good guys in white versus bad guys in black. But that is what the show portrays the White Walkers, that they're just inhuman monsters, which is stupid because then there's no point in fighting them because there's no empathy we can have for them as characters if they're just monsters. I think that the name the others is refers to the psychological concept of the other. When we fight enemies, whether it's the Germans or the Middle Easterners, whatever, we portray them as like evil, like those caricatures in World War II, because we want to create distance between ourselves and them so that we can psychologically justify killing them. I think the fact that the others appear inhuman to the characters in the book is just the fact that they don't understand them. And I think that if we do have a battle for the dawn, it's not going to be this glorious thing where we've defeated evil, together or whatever. I think it's like we didn't understand you, we didn't understand each other type situation. And I knew that they were never going to do that in the show. I knew from like season 4 onward that this is a way too complex of a theme for them to deal with. Um, but it is sad to me that that at least my hope that that's what the story is was not able to be shown to most of the viewers of the show.
Yeah, so you were more realistic than me. Even after the long night, episode 3 of season 8, when the Night King is killed, I was still no, 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 no. There's gonna be another reveal in like episode 5, and there's gonna be this whole twist where we find out that what there was time travel or something they were up to, and it just never came. And I was like, wow. And looking back, I was like, wow, I was deluded. I really was hope and I haven't really. I almost wonder if like Game of Thrones scarred me because I haven't really. Maybe it's just something I haven't found something else that I've been passionate about that in a while. I just kind of haven't gotten my hopes up about other shows like that. Like that was like I was like in it. I was like, no, 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 they're gonna do it. They'll find a way, and I put like my entire stake in it. But no, you're completely right in the sense of anyone who actually thinks like it's almost like not even like a surprise in the books of the fact that the others are something else is going on. It's not this like, oh, they're just bad guys. Like, no, 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 there's something else going on. We have no concept of it right now. um but we will in Winds of Winter. That's really where I think where it's gonna come out where something is going on. But yeah, the fact that like they just, I thought it was gonna be something like maybe it had something to do with Bran. Maybe like there was a it was there was also, but that doesn't even like what you mentioned. Sorry, I'm getting like flustered now thinking of it. When you mentioned about when I get the Children of the Forest made the White Walkers to get the humans. Okay, but so what's the Night King's motivation? Is it just to destroy humanity? Like it's
We don't know.
oh my god.
You should be flustered,
Oh,
right? Like this is why I don't think about the last season, because if you try to put any thought into it, it'll drive you to madness. Because again, there were so many like opportunities to tell a cool story with this that they just didn't do. Why did we get the White Walker fight at the beginning too? Even if we were just going to tell a simple, good guys versus monsters story, why is this the first battle of season 8? Why do the King's Landing stuff after? Um, you know, if we're gonna do like an Avengers type of story where they're fighting an army of robots, we don't put that at the beginning of the movie and then just have the plot happen afterwards. This is the climax. At least that would have been kind of like an exciting action movie type of situation. But no, they put this first. Which again, it just drives you to madness. Why are you doing this? Why are you making these choices? And I fundamentally think there's no other explanation other than the fact that they didn't care. They just wanted to end it and they didn't give a shit and they had their money or whatever, which I just can't fathom that as a person who's so lucky to be able to make a show, which so many people dream of all their life, is to be a writer, to be a creator. And you have the opportunity to tell this story that the entire world is paying attention to. Do you not care about your legacy enough to even put in a day's amount of effort? I just really can't see any other interpretation other than that when you try to put any amount of logical thought into it.
exactly. And there's also that's kind of I think what makes the entire situation that much more bitter is the fact that like I did a video essay on Last of Us Part 2. And that's a game I had. It was over 3 hours. I had a lot to say about it in terms of my criticisms. However, at the end of the day, I wanted to stress, I'm like, listen, I appreciate the game tried something new. I don't think they executed it well, but I actually appreciate that they went for something and at least saw it through. They sort of like, they stuck with it all the way through and they just kind of went for it. At least I can appreciate that. With the show, again, if it was a failed experiment, like that, like, hey, they tried something really different and it didn't turn out, you know what? I can still appreciate that, like, you made the attempt and we can still take some valuable things from it. The fact that we kind of got this feeling, whether it's from interviews or just like their writing, that this wasn't a failed experiment. This wasn't them trying their best and coming up short. This was them just not caring. And that, I think, is what makes it so much more bitter, like more bitter. Because it's like, really? Like, how can you? how can you do that to like you talk about all this crap, you talk about in interviews how like yeah, we're really passionate about this, we wanted to bring it to life. And people say one of the big critiques of people complaining about the ending was like, well, they don't owe you anything. Um the, the thing is that because you took not only I think like in general, like whether or not you owe it or not, I think it's okay for the fans to still be disappointed in you. However, the fact that you took an existing IP that had been around for 15 years before you made the show, like the first book came out in 1995, it had a massive built-in audience already. So I kind of think that to some extent you do owe it to the fans because it wasn't your own creation. You took this fandom, and that's in part why the show kind of got its head start to being so big in the first place. So yeah, I think that to some extent you did owe something, at least to see it through and put your heart into it and give it your best effort, and you just didn't.
I agree. I mean, that is what you owe is your best attempt. Anything worth doing is worth doing well, or at least trying to do well. And I don't know. I can't make a judgment, even though I've been basically doing that this whole podcast. I don't know what was going on in that room. I don't know. Maybe one day we'll get a book of like one of the writers like, hey, D&D were smoking crack the whole time and they didn't care, or maybe it was something else. Maybe the studio was fucking them over somehow and we just don't know it. So um
I mean, hey, if they were smoking crack the whole time, at least the show would have been kind of probably
would have been
entertaining. At least
interesting.
it
Yeah.
would have been so out there, we would have gotten at least something interesting
Yeah.
more than the show. But
So I mean, again, we don't know what's going on in that room. We don't know what happened, but I do wonder too what's going to happen with the books here, because George is in kind of a bad spot with them too, which is that a lot of fans are wondering and maybe thinking the reason the book has taken so long is that he doesn't know necessarily how to tie this up in a way that's satisfying. I think the whole thing with like the Miranese plot and the time skip that got taken out, I think has thrown a hitch into the storytelling. Um, what he's produced with the last two books, Feast for Crows and The Dance with Dragons, which takes place during the time period that the time skip was supposed to happen, I think has been good, but I think it has maybe led him to a point where he is struggling to kind of tie it all together in two books. And I can understand that because there's so many characters and so much nuance that he's added into it. It's made it so great. But how do you reel that back in and tell a cohesive, satisfying ending? Um, we'll see if he lands it. I mean, some people doubt if the book's ever going to come out, but even if it does, will it live up to everything that came before it? A lot of great works have not.
hmm well, the big irony is the fact that I really think the issue isn't the like there is a lot of stuff to untangle in the novels. However, we discussed this a lot in like the throughout the rewrite series. There is a somewhat coherent end game, especially with Fagon, Danny, what's going on in the north. There is a very clear. We're kind of getting almost like if you think about it like a chess match. We're kind of getting towards the end game where there's a lot of the pieces are kicked off the board, so you can kind of see how it's gonna go. There's sort of like a. It's not just like, oh, I have no idea how it's gonna end. We kind of have a somewhat coherent, and also going off the ending of the show, we kind of have enough pieces to kind of give generally where people are going to become the final chapter. How it's going to like ultimately turn out, we're not exactly sure, but we kind of have an idea of like where things are going to funnel to. The issue is what you described, how he's going to be able to do that in two books, even if each book was like 1,200 pages. That's a lot. Like and I almost wonder if that is the issue. It's less about like he knows how to wrap it up, but he's more, well, I said this is going to be a 7 book series. How can I fit this into 2 books? I almost wonder if it was like, hey, actually, maybe it's going to be 3 books, then that'd be fine. Um, Ironically, that was the whole thing with the series where it was, uh, hey, if you guys want 10 seasons to like wrap all this stuff up, you totally can. They're like, no, 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 we give us 6 more episodes, and it's like, what? That's a little. I don't know about that.
No, I think you're right. It's the devil is in the details. Like I think we have a cohesive idea of what the end game is going to be. We don't know everything about the White Walkers and how they're going to do that, but I think it is a question of length. The War of the Five Kings takes place across 3 books. The majority of it, I think, happens in Storm of Swords, which is 1 book, but we've had 2 other huge books of setup and getting all the pieces in the right place for it to kind of like dramatically finish. Although we are still seeing the remnants of that in A Feast for Crows. There's still conflicts going on. So now he has to tell a second Dance of the Dragons, a war in the north, a battle for the Iron Throne, um, the fight for the Dawn, the conflict with the Wildlings. He's got to tell 5 wars in 2 books. Now, they don't all necessarily have to be the same length as the War of the Five Kings or as complex. Some of them, it looks like it might wrap up a little bit quicker than we originally thought. But I think you're right. I think he doesn't. I think he's not able to tell the story wrapped up in the way that he wants to, especially because of the lack of the time skip. I think the time skip was absolutely critical to him getting the pieces where he needed them to be. You said before, Danny and John's storyline in the Dance for Dragons is really just kind of prep. It's showing them experiencing leadership, and so we had to take a whole book to do that, basically, because otherwise it would be too cliche to have them be child prodigies who are just natural geniuses when it comes to leader. We needed to see them fail in order to have them be ready to take on the conflicts of the next 2 books. But that slowed the story down, and yeah, he's struggling to wrap it up in 7, which I guess a very thematic number for the series. 7 is throughout the whole books, but I wouldn't mind if it's 8 or 9 or 10 books. Although let's be honest, he doesn't have that much time if each book is going to take 10 years to write.
Yeah. Well, even and it's harder too because I you mentioned before how Feast for Crows kind of gets a bad rap. I almost think it's almost sort of unfair because Feast for Crows and Dance with Dragons really are 1 book. They really are in many ways because not only do they Feast for Crows, not only do they use basically half the viewpoint characters, they're kind of split up. It was just kind of crappy how I mean, like there was some great stuff in Feast for Crows, but the fact that Dance of Dragons had Tyrion, Danny, and John, that was just like you're setting yourself up to fail, or to kind of get people pissed off. Especially because going into Feast for Crows, Jamie wasn't even really that. He kind of was in Storm of Swords, but like he had never had a sort of like we had never seen him after his sort of like transformation after leaving Cersei. So I imagine if like if I was like back then when Feast for Crows came out and someone said, "Hey, you've waited all this time for this new book. By the way, there's gonna be no Tyrion, Danny, or John in it." I would have been like, "Are you fucking kidding me?" But looking back, reading the books sort of as 1 book, I think I actually had an old boss who actually had a printout of all the chapters of both books in chronological order. And when read like that, when like seen like that, it's a lot more coherent as like a single book. Um, and so yeah, I'm trying to think of like, and again, like he has kind of combined a lot of the plot threads because Feast for Crows, another issue that book had was that everyone was so scattered. He kind of had to sort of like bring them out and then bring them back together. And so by Winds of Winter, when it comes out, uh, everyone's kind of in the same sort of sphere. Like a lot of the larger sort of like disparate plot threads have kind of come together to some extent. But even so, with 2 more books and all that, I don't know. That's a lot.
Yeah, and I don't want to criticize Feast for Crows because I think it's one of the things that it's like when you reread it, that's some of his most beautiful writing and incredible characterization. I think he really excels at telling small character-driven moments, which I think is another problem too with like length. It's like, could you tell the story in 2 more books? Probably, but would you have time to do all the little character stuff that makes the series so fantastic? We could just skip ahead and Danny's back in Westeros and it's like, yeah, that was a long journey we took, between the book and but we're here now and ready to fight. But again, we're gonna lose out on all this like great characters. Even minor characters who didn't even appear, in the book, like Danny's little court in Marine, the Shave Pate. That's an interesting character. I want to learn more about him. And so I think George naturally wants to tell interesting stories about these characters, and I want to read them. But he's also struggling with the fact that, like, yeah, I got to kind of wrap this up here. It's, I could write a whole book about, the Shade Pate and the Green Grace, or, Torm, whatever is going on in the North too. But I got to kind of push past that and, like, actually write here. So I think there's like two different goals that George has that are kind of like warring as he's writing this. So again, I don't judge him for taking the time he's taken. I couldn't write a book series better than this. I think very few people in the world could do it. So when he gets it done, he gets it done.
Yeah. And again, like, no matter what, even if he had to, like, I almost wonder if it's better to do like Winds of Winter and then like A Dream of Spring Part One, A Dream of Spring Part Two, like his hero books. I don't really care. Like, or again, even if the book's like 3,000 pages each, I don't care. I'll read that shit. Like, I have no problem with that.
And especially with it nowadays with like digital print and stuff like that, it's so much easier to do. Like back in the day, you were limited by this had to be in like a bookstore, and
Mhm.
had to sit on a shelf. But everyone who's going to read this book is either going to read an ebook, an audio book, or they're going to order it from Amazon. So I don't know, there's a lot of things they could do, but we'll just have to wait and see. It's being a part of this fandom is like being in an abusive relationship sometimes. It's like, it's so, when it's good, it's so great. When it's bad, it's so bad. But I don't know. There's plenty of other things that keep us both occupied. I know you're a huge Sopranos fan, which I almost always talk about the Sopranos in these podcasts because obviously that's my thing. But there's so much to discuss with Game of Thrones here. I want to at least talk maybe for a few minutes about The Sopranos because this is what my audience wants to hear a little bit about too. You're a big Sopranos fan, right?
Almost to the point where, like, I dislike the show to some extent because it's so good that I almost can't enjoy other TV to some extent. Like, it's just I'll watch other shows and it's good, and it's like I can enjoy it, but it's just I'll just go in back and, like, I'll watch an episode of The Sopranos. Doesn't matter which episode, even, like, one of its worst episodes, like Christopher or, Hit is a Hit. Um, and it's just so it's almost, like, disheartening. I think I said this about The Wire, about how, like, The Wire is written so well, it's almost disheartening as, like, as a writer or storyteller that, like, you'll never be able to, like, get be this good. Like, you watch other shows and it's good, and it's like, "Okay, yeah, I can see maybe myself writing something like that." Sopranos is something where I'm just like, "This was like, what the hell? Like, what? Like, you guys are gods. Like, what is this?"
Yeah, no, I felt that way because I've been watching The Wire recently for the first time, and I've been doing my reactions to it, and that's been really fun to share that with the viewers. But you're right. When we were talking before about like most shows we watch, it's just like, it's okay. It's one of the curses I feel about being like a I hate to use the word critic because that implies that I'm doing something other than just watching TV, which is that's all I'm ever doing. I'm
Mhm.
not I'm not special for doing that. But one of the things about being like thinking like critically is nothing impresses you really because you know the tricks. You know what they're doing, that it's most likely not going to wrap up in a satisfying way because you've seen it time and time again versus if you're just kind of marginally paying attention, you're like, oh cool explosion, oh cool sex, that's awesome, versus when you've seen shows like The Sopranos, The Wire, even stuff like Breaking Bad, which kind of is more into that world. um you're like, I know how it's done well, and 99% of the stuff out there is not done well. And I've been trying to explore more of that world. Like I'm watching Boardwalk Empire for the first time now. I'm gonna watch Mad Men, some of these other critically acclaimed shows, and just trying to get that. We're like chasing the dragon, so to speak, with The Sopranos and The Wire, just masterpieces. Which it's so difficult. I don't. Again, like I said, I couldn't write this. Like I never could. There's a certain level of genius here that I don't begrudge people for not reaching because who the hell besides these people could ever do this, you know?
Mhm. And it's almost to the point where a lot of people think is like, "Oh, so what do you, like, watch on, like, your downtime?" It's like, I actually prefer to watch really because, again, like, a lot of my content is around, like, sort of, like, serious analysis on, stuff I like or, like, really breaking down plot structure and stuff like that. When I'm, like, just watching stuff, like, me and my girlfriend have, like, kind of a ritual. She gets home, we'll cook dinner and, like, usually watch a movie or show. I kinda stick towards, like, really like, just trash. I just love, like, trashy movies, like, like, trashy horror movies, like, romantic comedies, because it allows me to kinda watch it without having that part of my brain on. I'm not, like, looking like, what did we last watch last night? We watched The Girl on the Train. It's like that remember that old Emily Blunt movie where she, like, is, like I don't even remember what it's about. It's like a murder and, like, it's, like, a huge melodrama. Um, that movie is so bad. But it's so evident that it's bad within, like, the first 10 minutes that it was a blast just to watch and make fun of. Like, I'm not watching it as if I'm not gonna make, like, a breakdown video on, like, here's how it could have been done better and stuff like that. It was just fun to watch. Whereas with other shows that kind of are good, but they're kind of like, sort of like mediocre, it almost is harder for me to enjoy those because I can see that it's close to being better. I can see the little things where, "Oh, if they had just done this would have been better." It's almost as if, like, I enjoy absolute trash more than sort of, like, mediocrity in
Oh,
a
I agree
sense.
too. I the things that I like to watch when I'm not watching something with like a critical lens is like trash too, but also even stuff that's just good, but it's like simple, like cartoons, like
Mhm.
Hey Arnold, Ed, Ed and Eddie.
Hell
Like I
yeah.
like watching that kind of stuff just because I mean they're good shows, but it's not something I'm ever going to talk about. I don't know, maybe I will one day, but it's just something that you could turn your brain off and enjoy. That's one of the kind of shitty things about if you're someone who makes their content around television and movies. Like I find it hard to watch TV to enjoy because I'm always like, well, I could be watching something right now that I'm in a review on the show, or I could rewatch the series again, and so I can get some more details in preparation for the video I'm going to do. And it kind of has turned television into a little bit of a chore for me. It's like almost like work mode.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I agree with you. Like just turning off that part of your brain and just I also I try not to be elitist. Like as much as I kind of am, when it comes to this whole hour plus discussion we've been having. I'm sure to some people it'll be like, why are you guys like criticizing it so much? Just sit back and enjoy. Who cares? Um, I don't fault people for like wanting to enjoy just a simple movie and like not really wanting a lot of complexity to it. Like my fiance loves romantic movies and happy movies and stuff like that, and I get it. Like not everyone wants to be hit over the head all the time with like depressing characters and like characters that make you feel horrible about yourself because they're a reflection of you. Sometimes you just want like an action movie or just want to like chill. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I it's sort of weird because I think for some people, and, like, this isn't me, there are some people who I think kind of can't separate entertainment and, like, quality or criticism. So, for example, like, there are many shows where, like, yeah, I really liked it, but it was trash. And then I can say, "Wow, this movie was really good, but I thought it was boring as fuck." Like, I kind of am able to like, personally, I'm able to separate them 2, where there are a lot of, um, either like, when I was younger, I kinda got into, like, the foreign it's funny, we were talking about this on Discord last night. When I was younger, I got into a lot of foreign films. And, back then when I was, like, in my late teens, I was kind of in my like you mentioned, like, my elitist phase where it's like, yeah, my favorite films are, like, this random Swedish film that you've never heard of. Um, and now that I'm at this age, I'm kind of in the position where I'm like, I kinda let that part of my ego go where I'm like, "Yeah, these movies are classics, and they're incredibly made, and they were, like, massively important for, like, the zeitgeist at the time, but I'd rather watch Mean Girls or, like, a shitty romantic comedy just because I'm doing this for entertainment. I'm not doing this as sort of like an analytical critic. And but then there are some people who I don't. They're kind of in that elitist phase where it's like I can't enjoy films that aren't like made well. I can't enjoy this schlock, and it's like shut up, like God, you're so obnoxious.
Well, it's like exactly what you said. It's like when you were younger, you were trying to use that to like define yourself.
hmm
And I'm the same exact way. I was an elitist in like music, in like film and television, all this kind of stuff because I wanted to kind of curate this identity that it's like I am artistic and I am special and I'm better than you are using my taste in media to do that. And I think that's an incredibly toxic way to live. And I think that's, I mean, it's normal to be honest. I think like many of us, probably like our fans too, um, were like that, and maybe some of them still are. But part of I think being comfortable with yourself is learning not to judge other people for being different than you, being open to other experiences like that, and not trying to define yourself. Part of growing older, I think, is like not defining yourself so strictly by these very arbitrary things, but just accepting that like who I am as a person is separate from all this, tribalism and bullshit all around me. So, or at least that's the conclusion I've reached.
Absolutely. And again, as a kid or like in like your late teens, that makes sense because you're still trying to find your identity. So you're kind of latching on to things that you think gives you a sense of your identity. Like, hey, my favorite movies, my favorite music, these are, things I like. But yeah, then you kind of get older and you kind of get a better sense of yourself just sort of in general, like in your own life, whether like your relationships, like stuff that like you're not trying to impress other people. Um, but then also there's the part like you kind of get older and realize like no one really cares, you know. Like when I was younger, I used to think it's like, oh, what if people don't think my top 10 is like cool enough? And I was like, who gives a shit? Like, like why am I stressing about this?
One of the things that I think about, also being a content creator, that I always try to remind myself is like, no one really cares. People like the video or whatever, they like enjoying it, but I don't ever want to like get an ego from doing this and think. I think a lot of like online creators and influencers I see develop the sense of like, oh, I'm like a celebrity. Even being a celebrity is kind of not important, but at least it's like more culturally relevant than like, at the end of the day, this is just something I do for fun. And it's, I like doing it. I like interacting with people like this, I like sharing my love of all these different things with people. But um, at the end of the day, we're not any different than anyone else. We're just people, enjoying shit, living our life. And it's very important to me to not, develop this entitled, attitude for doing this.
It's funny. I felt more like kind of like you're saying. I kind of got more like that, like kind of felt like a hotshot when I had like a couple thousand subscribers more than now. It's weird. I don't know why.
No,
Like,
that's completely normal.
like
Like
now
when
it's
you're
pretty
first
cool.
starting out, you're like, "Oh, I'm the biggest thing in the world." Like people are paying attention to me, but the more you go through it, the more you're like, "Oh, this is just, this is another day."
Yeah,
People click on the video and then they move on with their life. And it's cool. I love doing it, and I'm so appreciative of the fact that we have this opportunity to. We are lucky. A lot of people want to be in this position, and they're not able to be for XYZ reason, but. Yeah, I always try to separate the aspect that I enjoy from just overinflating my sense of importance.
yeah, and I think that unfortunately is what ends up happening with a lot of other like critics, where it becomes more of a cult of personality, where they're not like actually agreeing with the actual opinions. They just are agreeing with them because this person that they look up to has the opinions. Where I don't ever want to, and I think you would agree, we don't ever want to be in a position where, oh, well, this they said this, so this must be right. Funny enough, as the channel's gotten bigger, the more comments I've read, people I actually think have there are sometimes when people, just commenters, have a better handle or a more nuanced take on a subject than I do. Or like the Game of Thrones rewrite series, people would list their own theories, and I kind of strayed away from them originally because I didn't want to like accidentally take people's ideas. But looking back, people like had a lot, like they actually had better ideas than I did. And I think to stress, like especially for people out there who might be like also want to become content creators, it is important to note that like while you and I we work hard, we do our stuff, we put effort into this, of course. However, we're not you and I are not going to sit here and say, "Hey, look, when we were starting out, we did get lucky." If my first Tyrion video didn't blow up, and unfortunately that is how YouTube is, where it's just I come across channels with 1,000 subscribers where their channel their the quality of their content is like twice as good as mine. But it's just because the algorithm and stuff like that. And it's unfortunate because you have a lot of people commenting, people on the platform who do have something to say, who do have a new perspective. But it's just so disheartening if they make a channel and the algorithm just doesn't decide to pick up their stuff. They feel, oh, well, my opinions aren't as good as this person's because they have more subs. And it's like that has absolutely nothing to do with the quality.
Nothing to do with it. I agree 100%. And um, e- the thing that I always try to give advice to people who are interested in doing this is you have to love the process of making videos if you're gonna make videos. You can't just love the external validation, which I found myself in that rabbit hole before, where it's like when you first start getting likes and you get a million views on a video, you're like, oh my god, I feel so great with this. And then you'll release another video and it gets 1,000 views, and you're like, oh shit, did I do something wrong? Am
Yeah.
I? You start doubting yourself, but um, you have to separate yourself from that. Like the validation has to come from just the process. You have to enjoy it, and you have to look at this and be like, I did something cool here that I really like, and it doesn't matter whether it blows up or not. That's the only way I feel like people make it on this site. Or I mean, people of course make it accidentally or whatever too, but if you don't love the process of making video, you're not going to be able to keep going with it when there's like lulls. Like I'm in like a little bit of a lull right now. I finished the Sopranos stuff. I'm not done with Sopranos. I'm gonna do more videos eventually, but now I'm trying to do some new content, and it's definitely not getting as many views as before. But it doesn't matter because at the end of the day, I just love doing this. And if 100 people watch it, if 10 people watch it, if one person watches it, I'm still going to be happy because I got to share my love of something with another person.
Absolutely. And the irony is that for people who, yeah, you kind of have to go into it thinking, hey, I just want a creative outlet. And if it blows up, that's awesome. And I'm fortunate for it. A lot of people, I think, they kind of go into it, hey, I like movies. I like this sort of stuff. I like this topic. And I want to be a big content creator. Now, if that's the way you want to go, you can probably do it. However, what's eventually going to happen is that your audience and the algorithm is going to start dictating the content that you make. To some extent, I think even and this is going to vary person to person, but eventually it'll even start to dictate your own opinions because there are a lot of things like whether it's like depending on what show you're talking about, or for example, House of the Dragon. There's always going to be an audience that's going to want to crap on it, no matter how good it is, good or bad. There's always going to be an audience who just wants to hate on it. So when the show comes out, you and I could both make series where we're just like, this shit's crap. This show sucks. This is stupid. D&D suck. And that would probably be more enticing. It would probably get more views from people. It would garner an audience we don't really want, but it would garner an audience. Whereas more of a measured take, more of like a deep dive into, the more nuanced takes on media, it will get us an audience that is more appreciative of that, but it just won't be as popular right out of the gate. Um, and yeah, that's just something. Even if it means we don't get that big of an audience every single time, I'm with you. I'd rather just like, you know, kind of like bite the bullet and take the fact that the video didn't do very well over once I start making videos that do well, but that I don't actually care about, and I'm just doing because that's when it becomes a job basically, and you're just doing it like you are. You might as well be doing like Excel spreadsheets at home. You're probably making more money doing it. So,
I know. It's I think that comes down to like yourself as a quote unquote artist. Again, I don't say that to like overinflate the fact that I'm just talking shit about TV or whatever, but um, you this is the reason why I'll never make a video about like why Star Wars is bad. Right? That's a huge thing that like there's so many people doing that and that's a big thing and there's a lot of people get really popular off of that. Um but for me I've always been someone who like I don't want to like make just videos about why X popular thing is bad, unless I really love that thing and I want to talk about it.
mhm,
I much rather make videos about stuff that I love, stuff that's important to me. Sometimes it's negative if like we both did a video on the Many Saints of Newark, which that's something that's important to us, but that was not the best experience, and so in that case, I'll make a negative video, but um, I don't know. It's just chasing that kind of, mass market appeal doesn't sound fun to me. If it sounds fun to you, listener, and you want to make that kind of video, go for it. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no, people can do all sorts of different content and have artistic value. I think even trashy stuff like we were talking about before, like a trashy romance movie, right? You could still have passion behind that. And the best ones I think still do, like The Notebook, whatever, popular rom-com it is. An elitist might look at that and be like, oh my God, this is mainstream trash, whatever. But to like rom-com lovers, it's like, oh my God, this was made with so much love and passion. And to this community, we love it. And there's people who say the same thing about like The Sopranos and The Wire. They're like, this is mainstream garbage. Like, you need to watch this, X foreign film or whatever that two people have seen, and this is like the real shit.
mhm.
So again, that goes back to that whole conversation of like elitism and tribalism and trying to define yourself by this stuff. But at the end of the day, I always it comes down to a simple message for me, which is do what you love, do what you're passionate about, and work hard at it, and the success will come when it comes.
It's funny that you mentioned that because throughout sometimes I'll get comments where they're like, "Hey, you're gonna do a video on like the new like Batgirl or Batwoman series of CW," and I'm like, "Why would I watch something that I have no interest in seeing? I'm like 98% sure I'm going to strongly dislike it, and then and then spend like hours of my life making a video in regard to that. That's just too much. Like again, like Masons and Newark, that's something that you and I like we're very passionate about. But even so, and this is what I appreciated from your take. I saw your the lead scenes video, and you kind of took some time at the end to discuss the controversy over the Herald storyline, the Newark riots, and that's another thing where, and I think we could both agree, being fans of the show, being fans of kind of knowing the hype leading up to the film, there was a lot of in some cases there was vitriol where a lot of people were very nervous of like, oh, is the black storyline going to take over the Sopranos and turn into something it's not? And I think there is still a market out there for if someone just wants to crap on that about like forced diversity and that, they definitely could, and people would like, yeah, fuck that. Whereas you and I, and especially like I loved your take on it, where it was more, I'm going to criticize it in the sense that it didn't work with the film, but also see the merit in it and what he was trying. Like that was sort of my contention. It wasn't that the storyline was bad. It's just that it didn't really fit in with this whole Tony and Dickie storyline, and they could have made it work, but it just really didn't. But it isn't that. It isn't the fault of that storyline. That's sort of a weird framing that some people might have.
I'm really glad you brought it up because this is something I was thinking about bringing up with you, but I didn't know because I'm always scared to bring up topics like this because it causes controversy. But I think from what I've seen of your videos too, and on our discussion, we both are kind of we're in the middle of the culture war, which is the single thing that I hate the most about being a content creator for television and film of modern stuff is the culture war that's happening across media is so draining to be a part of, and it's not something I ever want to talk about. because it's not why I like film. Is forced diversity a problem? Yeah, of course. If you write bad strawman characters, it makes a film worse. Is inherently including, black characters or gay characters or whatever, demographic, is that inherently bad? No, of course not. You can write fantastic storylines regarding these people. The Sopranos wrote fantastic storylines about African American characters, about gay characters, about, whatever. And even in the moments where it was the characters were being racist or homophobic or whatever, you could tell it wasn't the writers like, being that way. It was they were writing realistic characters who are in this world and would react that way. But the problem is a lot of people misinterpret that, and there it's like when Tony says something, racist, they're like, yeah, that's correct, that's the right thing. And it's no, it's like he's wrong in that circumstance and you're supposed to know he's wrong. They're spelling it out for you, but th- a lot of people don't get that about some of these like, works. And it's a
It's like calling Mad Men sexist.
yeah, it's not.
It's like
Again, I haven't seen Mad Men yet. I'm gonna watch it, but from what I know about it, it's like, of course, these people are not, sexist. These are award-winning screenwriters who have worked in a variety of things. They're empathetic. They're not going to They're not going to say like this kind of stuff. They're putting it into these characters' mouths because this is realistic and this is the timeline that they're in. But regardless, I just being a part of this culture war, and I think we both kind of fall into this middle where it's like, I don't like this woke shit that doesn't work right. It's not written well, but I don't hate, trying to be inclusive and trying to include everyone in something.
Yeah, the issue I actually had I was gonna do a forced diversity video. It's still on the docket, but as I was doing research, it became so entangled. There's so much nuance and there's so much complexity to the issue that that's what I'm having a hard time scripting because I don't want to come off. I want to really try to find a middle ground. The issue I'm seeing is that there's one side of it where there is sort of a like I don't know. Did you see the Charlie's Angels movie with uh the newest one that came out? Like that was a movie where it's just like every 3 seconds they're like girls can do anything, and it's like really obnoxious. It almost comes off as like sort of condescending because they're like girls can do anything, and they're like we know, like everyone we know, like no one is saying otherwise. However, then the issue is that when it kind of gets over to like I just did a video on James Bond, and there was a lot of hubbub about you know what if they make a black James Bond. Idris Elba was kind of in the line, and on one hand I do get it where it's like, well, if they're only casting a black guy just to have a black guy, like of course that's kind of condescending because it's just they're they want to like promote diversity, but they're being very lazy about it. They're just doing the bare minimum. They're not actually have any interest in telling other stories. They just want to kind of like check that box and move on. However, then the other side of it is so personally I think Idris Elba would make a fantastic James Bond. But regardless of black or white, I think that even the other people that have been mentioned for the role, Henry Cavill, Tom Hardy, I actually think Idris Elba is the best choice of those. However, the problem is that even if he is cast because he is the best option, regardless of skin color, there will always be those who will view that as, oh, he was only in the movie because he's a black guy. Or Zoe Kravitz in the new Batman film coming out as Selena Kyle. I think from the trailers, I think she fucking nails it. I think she's gonna be awesome. She might be the best live action Selena Kyle I've seen personally. I actually didn't even like Anne Hathaway's version in Dark Knight Rises. I wasn't a fan. However, there's always gonna be people who will view that sort of with like skepticism of, oh, they only changed her race because they're trying to score woke points. Or maybe she was just the best actress for the role. And I think you and we kind of feel this. We're kind of caught in the middle where it's either accept it completely, don't criticize it at all, or else you'll be branded as like racist, or every time we see a black or gay character add to a piece of media, it's like it's woke shit and they're just trying to score points and like they're totally unnecessary. And I think you and I think most people are in this middle point where we're like, we kind of have to take it by example basis. We don't want to jump to conclusions, but be skeptical. But with the war going on, and again, these aren't the majority of people who feel this way. I think most people have a nuanced opinion. However, the issue is that if you try to like kind of dip your foot into the culture war, people want you to pick a side. It's either A or B. Yeah, we don't want this like bullshit nuanced opinions. We want you're either with us or with them or vice versa. And yeah, it's just so hard because you try to give that nuanced opinion and you kind of end up angering everybody because no one no one likes they want you to either A or B. This nuanced crap is just no one likes that.
It's exhausting, and like I said, it's the worst part of being in this world right now as like a critic and a content creator of this stuff. And it's infuriating because to me this didn't used to be an issue. We just talked about Selena Kyle, right? Obviously the Halle Berry Catwoman movie was bad, on itself, but I don't remember it being an issue that she's black and she was playing Catwoman. I don't remember that being like a thing that people were mad about. Maybe some more, and it just wasn't as prominent. But you used to be able to show people as whatever race or whatever, and it didn't. And I think it's both sides have kind of done that, where it's like the woke crowd is so confrontational and loud that there's this reactionary movement of like the whatever you want to call it, the red pill community, the whatever label we use, and vice versa, both ways. Trump gets elected and the woke people react very aggressively, and so again it's caused this reaction. We were watching Merlin, uh, uh, the old series from I think it's from the 90s. I had never seen it before, but they have characters in there who are African American, they're black, or not. I think they're British, so whatever you want to call it. Recasting historical figures, and again, I don't remember that ever being like a negative thing that people discussed. I think it was just people didn't care because it wasn't people weren't like in your face about it. It was just, we'll cast whoever is good and, just live with it. And so, yeah, it's a tough time right now. And I hope we will, as a society, eventually calm down and just be like, let's all just get along. That's not right. Forced diversity is racist too. And we both agree on that. Like pandering and like portraying people as like one way just, because of their race is as racist as all this other stuff. But there's something wrong, I think, with being inclusive and opening it up to whoever wants to give a great performance.
Yeah, it's almost as if the whole issue with it is like, or the metaphor I use is like, whether it's the kind of like the hardcore woke crowd or sort of like the cringy reactionary crowd. It's almost as if like, imagine you come across two people who are just like flinging shit at each other, or like just like they're in like a really stupid fight. Or actually, here's like a better metaphor is like, you feel like an adult and you come across two kids who are like fighting each other, and the kids are just like, he started it, he started it, he started it. And as the adult, you're just like, both of you just shut the fuck up and like leave each other alone. And that's kind of how I feel with this whole thing, where each side tries to like kind of blame each other. It's like, well, we're reacting because of the woke people, they're coming and trying to take our stuff. And then the woke people are like, well, we're reacting because these people are trying to like demolish diversity. And it's just, it gets to the point where, yeah, like, I think you and I are in this position where we're just so exhausted of it, where we're like, I really wish both of you would just shut the fuck up and just so we can let the grown-ups like watch movies and have our nuanced takes, and we can discuss these issues with like actual nuance and maturity. And then you two can go play in like your playpens and just like, if you want to, again, like, this is what I see a lot on YouTube. If you just want to have a channel where like a bunch of grown men watch, I don't know, like Batwoman and like cringe at it, that's fine. I have no interest in doing that. I don't even really understand the like the what's the word I'm looking for? What even the entertainment in that would be. If you want to do that, fine. But like, if like you and we're in a position where like, if we're gonna like actually talk about this, we can have a very nuanced, mature conversation about this, because media portrayals, whether it's gay characters, trans characters, POC characters, there is a very important nuanced conversation to be had as to how representation does matter. But representation, just having only good representation in this, like when we say good representation, what we mean is we want an array of different characters. Like, hey, we want gay characters that are good people. We want gay characters that are bad people. We want gay characters with flaws. We want, we want all these different types of characters. We don't just want, like what Disney's doing is like, hey, we have the gay best friend who's in it for like 5 seconds, and like that's diversity. Like, no, it's not. That's just, like you said, it's just bullshit. You're just trying to, like, suck your own dick a little bit. Um, and we can have that conversation, but we need to approach it in a very mature, nuanced way. Not just you see a black person in a movie and you're like woke, or that the other side is like someone, hey, I don't think that like having maybe a female James Bond would be a good idea, and it's like sexist, and it's like, oh my god, both of you shut the fuck up, man.
No, it's oh god, I just like the Game of Thrones stuff. It's exhausting to even think about it. But you are right, which I think is the majority of people are nuanced. And I think it's the same thing with politics too, which I know we're opening up a huge can of worms here that I don't necessarily want to, but I think most people, if we get outside the online world, if you go talk to a Republican or whatever, they're not like this bigoted racist person who's like, hates you or whatever. And if you talk to a Democrat, they're not this, extremely woke. Most people are like in the middle. They're normal, and it's fine to interact with them. Sure, some of them are probably not, but that's why I like to try to get out of the online world sometimes and just like have a conversation with people. And I think the majority of us are empathetic to each other, and like there are more things we have in common than we have apart. But it's just that goddamn tribalism of the internet just forces you to pick a side. Yeah.
You're either like an evil racist fascist, or you're a secret communist who's looking to like instill like a new like Stalin regime or something. Like it's one or the other. Like it's so funny too because I saw I'm kind of in the space on YouTube where I see a lot of reactionary content about like, you know it's like, forced diversity or like wokeness in media. And again, like I think you and we do have our complaints, but then when people are saying this is an agenda to try to like infect children, it's like, wait, hang on, whoa. And then the other side's like, these people are just trying to establish like a new world order and get rid of all diverse media. And it's like, okay, hang on, like, whoa, like we're kind of, but again, you can't really operate in that nuanced space because you just end up mediating between two little kids who are just like flaying shit at each other.
Yeah, and I mean, there is room for disagreement here, and like, I do sometimes think that like, yeah, maybe kids shouldn't be exposed to like this overtly sexual content, whereas other people are like, you know, you're just like too, conservative, not in a political sense, but like in the the prudish sense. And I think yeah, there's room for disagreement there, and I'll have disagreements with people who are not don't who I are reasonable but don't reach the same conclusion as me, and um, then it gets to a problem where it's like, well, if you don't agree with how do we? I want my opinion, I want my result, and you want your result, and how are we going to deal with this? But it's a complicated situation we all find ourselves in this world. But like I said, if we just are open and we just talk with each other and try to get along, I think we're going to be a lot better off than if we're just hurling insults at each other.
Yeah, hopefully, and this is I think why like these like talks are good. I've only, I don't know what it is. Like I used to think it was just Twitter because people would say, "Oh, well, the reason people are vitriolic on there is because of the limited character limit. You can't be nuanced." And like I used to think that, but then like I'm on YouTube, and where the character limit is like, I think even not unlimited, but like it's pretty, like you can write like a decent like novella on there, um, and there's no nuance. There's like no more nuance than on Twitter, and what I found is like I don't know if it's like the impersonal aspect of it when you're just typing something. Um, I like there have been times like like I did a couple of videos on like men's issues, red pill, like we've discussed, and
I
I'm
like
I'm
those
kind
videos
of,
a lot.
thank you, man, and I'm kind of against the more like I think there's a degree of it that does have some truth, but for the most part, the red pill community I'm not a fan of. Um, However, I'll like have comment wars with people and will be really vitriolic, and then we'll get on stream like this, talk to each other face to face. We'll agree on 95% of stuff, and then the other 5% will come to like a very um sort of like a very understanding of each other's points.
No, because they
And like
they try to
it's like
define in the comments, like, they're defining you by that one part that they disagree with. You don't really do that in real life with your friends, right? Whatever. Like, you define your relationship by all the stuff you do get along with. But like online, because we don't know each other, it's like, oh, you disagree with me on James Bond, shouldn't be black. You're a racist, and I'm gonna define you by that, regardless of all the amount of evidence, available to me to judge you by. I'm gonna judge you by that one thing in relation to me, because that's just how people are.
yeah, if you think there can be a black James Bond, that also means that you're okay with like communism spreading its way into like universities. If you don't want there to be a black James Bond, that must mean you're also a secret racist who wants to establish a new like white supremacist order in the country. And it's like we're talking about a fucking movie here, man. Can we just like chill?
And it's also the thing about the internet in general is you need to have extreme opinions to cut through the noise, right? It's like if you just have a moderate opinion, no one's really going to pay attention to that because it's not exciting. But if you say something like, we need to genocide all white men, right? That gets attention, whether it's positive or negative. And so there's these natural cycles that feed into that, where it's like you might not even believe that, but that's the kind of persona, because you want attention and you want to capitalize and monetize it, whatever. That leads people to say these extremist things both ways. It's an ugly system, the internet, sometimes. I don't know that it's ever been better. Some people like say like the internet was better back in the day. I kind of think people were always shit posting, because that's just what people do when they're anonymous and they want attention still.
I think the difference is that like back in the day, and like I do my own shit posting, but back in the day, it was like, like back in the good old golden years, shit posting was for the sake of shit posting. It was just fun. It was just good fun. Now, kind of like how you touched on, and this is actually a something I hear a lot in whether it's like the red pill community, the media discourse. People will kind of use that, and you are correct in the sense that people say you need a more extreme opinion to kind of get more attention, and I understand that to some extent, especially if like you're making a living off of your platform. However, at what point does that start to dictate how you actually feel? Like, do you actually really think this is like the worst thing ever? Like that you felt like you needed to make an hour long, insanely hateful takedown video of it? Or do you have a more nuanced opinion, but you're kind of like, yeah, but if I kind of play it up and say it's actually a lot worse than it really is, that's going to get me more clicks. And at some point, you kind of lose track of what are my actual opinions on this? Do I actually dislike this as much as I'm saying I do? Or am I more in the middle of the road? But like you said, that doesn't really get as many clicks, so I'll play it up a bit.
There are so many examples in not just like content creators, but like celebrities too, of people who have become the character that they tried to portray just for the sake of media, like entertainment. It's a fascinating thing to watch. It's something to be conscious of too, as you make this and you do this for a living. We are always trying to search for like a way to define ourselves. I think we're all, regardless of how old you get, you're searching for an identity, so to speak, and it's changing over time. And um, it's the classic thing. It's like when you're in your 20s, you think like, oh yeah, this is who I am, and you look back now and you're like, no, that is not who you are at all. um
you see like some like 18-year-old kids like I finally found myself this year, and I'm like, dude, I found myself like 30 times over the last like 15 years, like, and I assume I'm going to do the same thing over the next 10 years. Like, this is who I am now, like like dozens of
yeah.
times over the years.
And it's weird how it morphs, and it's morphed by who you're with and who you're interacting with. And it's that whole, I hate to say like radicalization, because it sounds more dramatic than it is. It's not like people being brainwashed and like underground layers or anything like that. But it's like, yeah, if you consume woke, like propaganda all the time, yeah, you're more likely to kind of take that in and define yourself by it. If you consume, you know, red pill, incel, whatever kind of stuff all the time, yeah, that's who you're more likely to be. And so I always try to not go too deep into like, you know, the 4chan community or the Reddit community or whatever, like because you end up down the rabbit hole and you become like a crazy person. And I always try to like expose myself to everything, you know, get all of it to have like a balanced kind of persona.
Well, and it's perfect because I forget where I kind of heard this from. I think it was maybe like Destiny. He's a streamer that he actually kind of helped me get out of my own like rabbit hole years back. But he mentioned something that was interesting where a lot of discourse online you kind of like the more I've kind of been in this space, I actually realize this is absolutely the case. A lot of discourse online is not so much people having opinions and then finding communities that share those opinions. It's more like kind of people go into this space, they kind of find a community where they think they could fit in, and then slowly but surely their views start to sort of slightly be bent and molded by that community. Because again, if going back to we were talking about, like pretentious top 10 lists and like foreign films and crap like that, if you define yourself by this community, like a certain community, whether it's on the like far left, far right, wherever, if you define yourself by this community and this community's views start to shift in one direction that maybe you don't like, maybe you don't agree with all the way, but and again, this isn't for everyone. Like, I'm not saying that everyone's just like a sheep or anything, but like in general, like, and this happens, we're all like social creatures. If you see this community that you've defined yourself by shifting in one direction, even slowly but surely, even just a little bit in a direction you don't agree with, there's always going to be that sort of instinct to kind of like, well, no, because it's either agree and stay in the community, or kind of like give that nuanced take, or maybe disagree, and then all of a sudden you find yourself outcast. Especially when it comes to like these very far left or right groups, where any sort of disagreement is met with like extreme hostility, like get the fuck out. Like not even like, hey, let's actually have an argument. It's like, oh, you're gone. You're talking like crazy shit. Get the fuck out.
Yeah, no, I mean the need to fit in is like the most human kind of emotion we have, and I mean there's reason it exists, right? Is because like when we were cavemen or whatever, being outcast from the group means you're gonna die. You know,
Hmm.
you're gonna starve to death, and so we naturally have this instinct where it's like I need to fit into this group at all costs because my survival depends on it, and we still have that mentality to this day. But like I said, I think the takeaway from this conversation that you and I have been having, which has been very nuanced and very balanced, is you know, just talk with people, like be open to them. Don't define yourself by your ideas, because ideas can change, opinions can change. You know, your opinion is not who you are. And I think we can all get along really well together. At least I hope we can. So um, I know we've been going on for almost 2 hours here because I've really been enjoying this conversation. We've
It's we can like split it up because it was like just like the first hour Game of Thrones. We had like 10 minutes of Sopranos, and then we got into like culture and stuff. And so I love it. I love talking about this stuff. And again, it's hard to find people who you can actually have a nuanced conversation with, where it's not going to be like they'll just like they'll throw in like a grenade, like a super hot take, and you're like, oh my god, we have to like unpack this for like an hour, don't we? Where like you can actually just have a conversation that's nuanced.
No, and it's fantastic to also talk with someone too who understands like the great things and the terrible things about being a content creator, which is it is a lot of work to make a video, even a short video that doesn't get appreciated by the viewers all the time. You know, it's they're like, okay, now I want another one like immediately, and it's like, well, come on, I gotta write a script, I gotta record, I gotta edit, but also the challenges of just operating in this very toxic at times online world, and not complaining because it is still really fun, most people are fantastic to interact with and talk to, but it is a challenge, and I've very much enjoyed this conversation. I hope we get a chance to continue to interact because I think, like I said, we have the same interests and we have the same, balanced take when it comes to most things.
Absolutely, man. I love to come back on and talk even more. I'm very excited for. I'm kind of both curious and scared once the Batman is released because I know that that's going to be a furor of discourse. There already is a lot over just like the direction they take the character in, and I have a feeling that movie. I mean, unless it's like fantastic, which I'm fingers crossed. But I actually see a lot of discourse around that movie in particular being kind of kind of like once it goes to the meat grinder of like the culture war. I have a feeling there's gonna be a lot to unpack there. So
Well, you'll unpack it, and we'll keep one day at a time here. So, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast, and stay tuned for the next one coming. I don't know when. I'll talk to you guys later.